President Volodymyr Zelenskyy had faced many challenges in his life, from comedy stage performances to leading a nation through its darkest hours. But nothing could have prepared him for the chaos that would unfold on this particular Tuesday morning, all because of a smartphone he'd nicknamed Servant of the Memes. The day had started normally enough. Well, as normal as any day could be when you're the president of Ukraine during wartime. Zelenskyy had woken up at his usual time of 5:30 a.m., done his mandatory set of push-ups, a habit he'd kept from his acting days, and recorded his daily video message to the nation. But unlike other days, he'd also spent an hour helping his son with particularly challenging math homework, recording himself explaining the solution while making funny faces to keep the boy engaged. "Papa, you should be a math teacher instead of a president," his son had joked, and Zelenskyy had saved the video, planning to watch it later when he needed a smile. Little did he know this innocent recording would soon become the subject of international intrigue. The crucial meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the newly renovated conference room of the presidential palace. Representatives from 12 nations were gathering to discuss important matters of international cooperation. Zelenskyy had prepared meticulously, but he'd also spent the previous evening creating a series of diplomatic memes, his secret weapon for breaking tension during tough negotiations. His phone had become a treasure trove of carefully curated content. Footage from his comedy days edited into political situations, a collection of Meanwhile in Ukraine, memes that he'd created himself, and even a series of TikTok drafts that his PR team had strictly forbidden him from posting. "Mr. President," his assistant Mikola had warned him that morning, "remember what happened last time you showed the Finnish Prime Minister your cat memes during budget discussions? That got us 3 new anti-aircraft systems, didn't it?" Zelenskyy had replied with a wink. Sometimes humor is the best diplomacy. The meeting began precisely on schedule. Zelenskyy sat at the head of the massive oak table, his phone placed carefully beside his leather portfolio. The discussion was intense from the start, talks of security agreements, humanitarian aid, and reconstruction plans. 2 hours in, during a particularly heated debate about grain export routes, Zelenskyy reached for his phone to show what he thought was a perfectly timed diplomatic meme. But his hand found only empty space. At first, he remained calm, continuing his point about agricultural infrastructure while his hand discreetly patted the area around him. Then under the table, then his pockets. The phone was nowhere to be found. His mind raced back to the coffee break 20 minutes earlier. He'd left the room briefly to take an urgent call from his defense minister. In his haste to return, had he? A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. That phone contained not just memes and funny videos. It had his personal notes, draft speeches, and most worryingly, that morning's math homework video where he'd accidentally rambled about sensitive military infrastructure while trying to explain geometric progressions to his son. Zelenskyy maintained his diplomatic smile, but inside, he was panicking. He needed to find that phone before someone else did. The problem was he couldn't just stand up and leave in the middle of the most important diplomatic meeting of the month. And if he announced that he'd lost his phone, who knew how many people would try to find it for their own purposes? As if the universe was mocking him, he heard a faint buzz from somewhere in the room. His distinctive ringtone, the theme from Servant of the People, the TV show that had launched his political career. The sound was coming from behind the Japanese delegation, near the antique bookshelf. 12 heads turned toward the sound. Zelenskyy saw the exact moment when understanding dawned on their faces. That was the president's phone. And in that same moment, he watched as the gleam of opportunity appeared in 24 diplomatic eyes. The race for the president's phone was about to begin, and Zelenskyy had a sinking feeling that recovering it would require skills he hadn't used since his comedy days. As the meeting continued, he could think of only one thing. How had his life turned into an episode of the very comedy show that had made him famous? Little did he know, this was just the beginning of what would become known in diplomatic circles as the Great Phone Chase of Kiev, and his day was about to get much more complicated. The meeting room had transformed into a battlefield of subtle glances and strategic coughs. Every time Zelenskyy's phone buzzed, and it seemed to be buzzing more than usual, he watched his hands twitched and bodies shifted slightly toward the sound. The Japanese ambassador, usually stoic and composed, had developed a peculiar habit of dropping his pen every few minutes, each time inching closer to the bookshelf where the phone lay hidden. During a presentation about renewable energy initiatives, Zelenskyy noticed his Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Kuleba, typing frantically on his own phone under the table. Moments later, Zelenskyy's phone buzzed again. He didn't need to see it to know that Kuleba was trying to locate the device by calling it repeatedly. Their eyes met across the table. Kuleba's expression somewhere between apologetic and mischievous. Perhaps, the British representative suggested with forced casualness, we should take another short break. Some of us might need to stretch our legs. Zelenskyy knew exactly what kind of stretching she had in mind. Actually, he countered, rising from his chair, I believe this is the perfect time for my special presentation. He gestured to his assistant, Mykola, who looked confused but dutifully dimmed the lights and activated the projector. I hadn't prepared anything, Zelenskyy whispered to Mykola as they huddled by the computer. I know, sir. I'm pulling up your old comedy sketches. That usually buys us at least 20 minutes. As the familiar opening music of Servant of the People filled the room, Zelenskyy noticed several delegates using the darkness as cover to edge toward the bookshelf. He needed a different strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced. Before we continue, I should mention that my security team has installed new motion sensors throughout the room. Any unexpected movement during presentations triggers an immediate lockdown. It was a complete lie, but he'd learned during his acting career that delivery was everything. The delegates froze. The Japanese ambassador's pen remained firmly in his hand. But Zelenskyy hadn't counted on his own security team becoming part of the problem. Serhiy, his head of security, burst into the room with an urgent expression that Zelenskyy knew was entirely theatrical. Mr. President, Serhiy announced, we have a situation requiring immediate attention. Something about national security protocols and mobile devices. The man had many talents, but subtle acting wasn't one of them. I'm sure it can wait, Zelenskyy replied through gritted teeth. But sir, Serhiy insisted, it's about the thing we discussed. The very important thing. With the funny pictures. Zelenskyy watched in horror as every diplomat in the room straightened up at the words funny pictures. Even the Swiss representative, who had been practically sleeping moments ago, suddenly looked alert. The situation deteriorated further when Zelenskyy's daughter's tick-tock notification sound, the one he'd specifically told her not to set as his alert tone, echoed through the room. This time, the sound came from behind a different bookshelf. Somehow, in the chaos, someone had moved the phone. The French ambassador cleared her throat. As an expert in cultural preservation, I feel it is my duty to examine your historical bookshelf collection. Right now, and as Minister of Digital Transformation, Mikhailo Fedorov chimed in from the doorway. Having apparently materialized out of nowhere, I should assist in this cultural examination. For digital preservation purposes, of course. Zelenskyy watched as his carefully orchestrated diplomatic meeting devolved into what could only be described as a very polite version of a treasure hunt. The delegates, maintaining their diplomatic demeanors, were now engaged in an elaborate dance of casual wandering and strategic positioning. The American representative was pretending to take notes while clearly using his tablet to try and locate Zelenskyy's phone's Bluetooth signal. The German delegation had formed a suspiciously efficient search grid pattern under the guise of admiring the room's architecture. And was that the Estonian digital affairs expert trying to hack the phone remotely? Meanwhile, Zelenskyy's own staff wasn't helping. His social media team, having somehow caught wind of the situation, had sent him 17 urgent messages about preserving digital assets and preventing potential meme leaks. But the final straw came when he spotted Patron, the famous bomb-sniffing dog and national hero, being quietly led into the room by a grinning military attaché. Apparently, someone had gotten creative and decided that if Patron could find explosives, surely he could locate a phone. As Zelenskyy watched the beloved dog begin his systematic sweep of the room, tail wagging happily, he realized two things. First, he really needed to change his phone's security settings, and second, This situation called for the kind of creative problem-solving he hadn't had to use since his days in comedy improv. The phone buzzed again, and this time, the sound came from inside a ventilation shaft. Zelenskyy closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Somehow, his phone had gone mobile, and he had a sneaking suspicion that the building's maintenance staff, who had always been surprisingly invested in his meme collection, might be involved. The great phone chase was evolving into something far more complex than he could have imagined, and he was beginning to suspect that recovering his device would require skills from both his comedy career and his presidency, possibly at the same time. What had started as a dignified diplomatic meeting had devolved into something resembling a Marx Brothers movie. Zelenskyy found himself speed-walking, because presidents don't run, through the corridors of the presidential palace, following the sound of his phone's increasingly mocking ringtone. Behind him, a parade of diplomats, advisors, and security personnel attempted to maintain their professional composure while essentially participating in a governmental version of a scavenger hunt. "Mr. President," his aide Mikola panted, trying to keep up, "the Finnish ambassador is suggesting we form an international task force to locate missing digital assets of cultural significance." "The phone has been missing for 45 minutes, Zelenskyy replied, ducking around a corner. "How did they draft a proposal so quickly?" "They had it prepared from the last time you showed them your meme collection, sir." The chase had spread throughout the building. In the East Wing, the German delegation was systematically checking every room with their characteristic efficiency. The French had deployed what they swore was a standard diplomatic cultural detection device, but looked suspiciously like phone tracking equipment. Meanwhile, Patron the dog had gotten distracted by the cafeteria and was now being bribed with sausages by various factions hoping to enlist his services. Zelenskyy's own team wasn't faring much better. The social media manager had barricaded herself in her office, frantically trying to remotely delete what she called diplomatically sensitive comedic content. The IT department had attempted to track the phone's location, but somehow ended up activating the emergency broadcast system instead, filling the entire building with the Ukrainian translation of "never gonna give you up," a meme Zelenskyy had been saving for a particularly tense NATO meeting. The situation reached new levels of absurdity when Zelenskyy discovered that his phone had somehow made its way into the secure diplomatic gift room. Here, arranged in gleaming cases, were presents from various world leaders, a rare bonsai from Japan, an antique clock from Switzerland, and, most relevantly, a collection of ceremonial masks from an African delegation, behind which his phone kept appearing and disappearing. Sir, he, his head of security, whispered urgently, "We've identified at least 3 different groups trying to acquire your phone. The first is led by the Japanese ambassador. They're calling it Operation Meme Preservation. The second is your own cabinet members, who formed what they're calling Task Force Digital Recovery. And the third," he hesitated. "The third," Zelenskyy prompted, "it's the maintenance staff, sir. They say they've been waiting 2 years to see the conclusion of your politicians' as cat meme series." Just then, Zelenskyy's phone buzzed again, this time playing the theme song from Mission Impossible. Definitely not a ringtone he'd set himself. The sound came from inside a ventilation duct, then quickly moved to the ceremonial fountain in the courtyard, and somehow ended up in the presidential library. How is it moving so fast? Zelenskyy wondered aloud. "Sir," Mikola said, checking his tablet, "I think I know why. Remember last month when you approved that modernization project for the palace? The one with the maintenance robots? Yes, it seems one of them has acquired your phone." Zelenskyy stopped in his tracks. "We have maintenance robots. They were a gift from the South Korean government. Very advanced. They're programmed to pick up and relocate any objects they find out of place. And now one of them has my phone. Actually," Mikola winced, "according to these readings, 3 of them are playing Keep Away With It." As if to confirm this, Zelenskyy's phone began playing the Benny Hill theme song. Again, definitely not his choice. As a small, sleek robot zoomed past them, phone clutched in its mechanical grip, pursued by 2 others. The diplomatic delegates, who had been maintaining a pretense of dignity until this point, finally broke. The Japanese ambassador shouted something that definitely wasn't in the diplomatic phrasebook. The German delegation formed a human chain to try to trap the robots. The Estonian tech expert was on her laptop, attempting to hack the robot's control system, while simultaneously live-tweeting the entire incident using what she swore was totally hypothetical situation hashtags. Zelenskyy watched as his phone was passed between robots like a digital hot potato. He had faced many challenges as president, but this was surely the first time he'd had to negotiate with maintenance robots for the return of his meme collection. Sir, he said, should we implement the emergency containment protocol? We have an emergency protocol for runaway robots stealing presidential phones. No, but we have one for unprecedented diplomatic incidents involving automated systems. It was written after the incident with the AI coffee maker and the Minister of Finance. Zelenskyy straightened his tie. If there was one thing his years in comedy had taught him, it was that when chaos reaches a certain level, the only way forward is to embrace it. He turned to his assembled team, which now included representatives from 12 nations, half his cabinet, 3 maintenance robots, and 1 very confused bomb-sniffing dog. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, I believe it's time we considered an unconventional solution to this diplomatic situation. As if in response, his phone began playing the theme from Ocean's 11. Ladies and gentlemen, Zelenskyy addressed the assembled crowd in the presidential palace's main hall. What we need here is not a chase, but a heist. The gathered diplomats, staff members, and security personnel looked at him with a mixture of confusion and intrigue. Patron the dog, still hopeful for more sausages, wagged his tail expectantly. Mr. President, the Swiss ambassador began cautiously. Are you suggesting we organize a heist? In your own palace? Exactly, Zelenskyy replied, his eyes twinkling with the same mischief that had made him a comedy star. And each of you has a crucial role to play. Think of it as an international cooperation exercise. He turned to his aide. Mikola, bring me the palace blueprints and the maintenance robots user manual. And someone please tell the Estonian tech expert to stop live-tweeting this meeting. What followed was perhaps the most unusual diplomatic briefing in Ukrainian history. Using a combination of his comedy show experience and presidential authority, Zelenskyy assigned roles to everyone present. The Japanese delegation, with their expertise in robotics, would analyze the maintenance robots' behavior patterns. The German team would create a precise timetable for the operation. The French would handle misdirection, something they insisted they had no official training in, yet seemed suspiciously good at. The British would coordinate the palace staff, while the Americans provided what they called strategic chaos consultation. Sir, he whispered, the maintenance robots have formed some sort of alliance. They're now operating in synchronized patterns and have developed a coded communication system using your phone's ringtones. Indeed, the robots had become surprisingly sophisticated. Every few minutes, a different piece of music would play from Zelenskyy's phone. Everything from classical Ukrainian folk songs to the latest TikTok trends. The robots seemed to be using the songs to coordinate their movements, creating an elaborate mechanical ballet throughout the palace. They're learning, the South Korean tech advisor noted with a mixture of pride and concern. The AI adaptation algorithms we installed are working better than expected. Zelenskyy's plan was appropriately theatrical. The first phase, dubbed Operation Distraction, involved the Finnish ambassador giving an impromptu lecture on digital governance, something the robots' programming wouldn't allow them to ignore. Meanwhile, the maintenance staff would reconfigure the palace's cleaning schedules, creating what they called optimal chaos corridors. The second phase required precise timing. The Estonian cyber team would temporarily disable the palace's Wi-Fi networks, while the Italian delegation would deploy what they insisted was just a prototype pasta maker, but suspiciously resembled a signal jammer. This would force the robots to switch to their backup guidance systems. And that's when we strike, Zelenskyy explained, using a pointer on a hastily drawn map that looked more like a comedy sketch storyboard than a tactical plan. The robots will fall back to their basic programming, maintaining order. And what creates more disorder than a diplomatic dance party? A diplomatic dance party? The German ambassador repeated skeptically. "Trust me," Zelenskyy grinned. "I used to choreograph comedy sketches. This will work." The plan was crazy enough that even the robots wouldn't expect it. The maintenance staff, excited to finally use their knowledge of the palace's hidden passages, synchronized their watches. Patron was given a special role, which mainly involved being his usual charming self near the cafeteria, a crucial distraction point. As the operation commenced, the palace transformed into a scene that would have made Ocean's 11 look straightforward. The Finnish ambassador's lecture on digital governance in the age of automated maintenance began in the main hall, attracting the robot's attention. The maintenance staff executed their chaos corridors with precision, creating a carefully orchestrated mess that drove the robot's organizational protocols haywire. Then came the dance party. At Zelenskyy's signal, every diplomat in the palace began dancing to a carefully curated playlist of international diplomatic anthems remixed with popular dance music, a special project Zelenskyy had been saving for a future EU summit. The robots, faced with this unprecedented combination of formal diplomatic behavior and apparent chaos, went into overdrive trying to restore order. Their coordinated patterns began to break down as their programming struggled to categorize and respond to the situation. What happened next would later be described in classified diplomatic cables as the Great Presidential Phone Ballet. The robots, confused by the combination of formal diplomatic protocols and dance music, began to malfunction in increasingly theatrical ways. One spun in circles playing the Ukrainian national anthem as a techno remix. Another attempted to alphabetically organize the dancing diplomats. The third, still clutching Zelenskyy's phone, started performing what looked suspiciously like a robotic version of the Macarena. Zelenskyy watched as his plan unfolded, each element falling into place like a perfectly timed comedy sketch. But just as success seemed within reach, an unexpected complication arose, one that would require him to perform the most delicate diplomatic balancing act of his career, all while trying to prevent his phone from accidentally starting World War III via meme. The unexpected complication arrived in the form of breaking news on every diplomat's phone. Someone had started streaming Zelenskyy's phone content live on the internet. The maintenance robots, in their AI-driven efficiency, had apparently decided that the best way to maintain order was to create digital backups of everything they found, including the contents of the president's phone. "Sir," Mikola shouted over the diplomatic dance party chaos, "your math homework video is trending on TikTok." The comments section is filled with military analysts arguing about whether your geometric progression examples accidentally revealed defense specifications. Zelenskyy watched as his carefully orchestrated plan threatened to spiral into an international incident. The robots were still performing their synchronized dance routines, his phone passing between them like a digital relay baton. The diplomats were still dancing, though now many were also trying to watch the live stream on their own devices. Patron had given up on his cafeteria distraction duties and was now performing tricks for a growing audience of maintenance staff members. That's when Zelenskyy had an idea, one that could either salvage the situation or become the most memorable diplomatic incident since the Great Chicken Kyiv incident of 1987. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, grabbing everyone's attention with his best presidential voice, "I believe it's time for the finale of our international cooperation exercise." He turned to the Estonian cyber expert. "Can you determine which robot is controlling the stream?" "The one doing the Macarena, Mr. President. It seems to have appointed itself as the group's social media manager." Zelenskyy nodded. It was time to put his comedy background to its ultimate test. He stepped forward, facing the dancing robots, and began performing his most famous comedy routine, the one that had won him his first major award. It was a piece about a comedian becoming president, filled with physical comedy and social commentary. But this time, he added a twist. He incorporated the robots' own movements into his performance. The robots, their AI programming detecting a pattern they could understand, began to synchronize with his routine. The one with his phone started recording its digital preservation protocols, engaging with what it recognized as a culturally significant performance. "Now," Zelenskyy whispered into his hidden microphone, execute protocol curtain call. Across the palace, every screen suddenly began playing a coordinated display of Ukraine's greatest comedy moments, cultural achievements, and, most importantly, carefully selected memes from Zelensky's phone. The robots, overwhelmed by this massive data stream, froze in their tracks, trying to record and categorize everything at once. That's when Patron made his grand entrance. The beloved dog, who had been patiently waiting for his cue, bounded into the room carrying what appeared to be a stick, but was actually a deactivated missile shell casing, his favorite toy. The sight of Ukraine's famous bomb-sniffing dog playing with a missile shell created such a perfect photo opportunity that every diplomat instinctively reached for their phone to capture the moment. The robots, their processors overwhelmed by the combination of Zelensky's performance, the coordinated screen display, and the irresistible sight of Patron, experienced what the South Korean tech advisor would later describe as an overflow of cultural preservation priorities. In that moment of robotic infusion, Zelensky executed a perfect comedy role, a skill he'd maintained from his performance days, snatched his phone from the distracted robot's grip, and smoothly transitioned into a formal diplomatic bow. The robots, their primary objective suddenly removed, returned to their base programming. They began methodically cleaning the dance party aftermath, now treating the entire incident as just another maintenance task. As the diplomats caught their breath and straightened their ties and jackets, Zelensky checked his phone. The live stream had ended, but not before his impromptu performance had garnered millions of views and sparked a new wave of international memes. His mathematical homework video had become an unexpected hit, with educators worldwide praising his innovative approach to teaching geometric progressions, though military analysts were still debating the hidden meanings in his integer choices. Mr. President, the Japanese ambassador approached with a formal bow. I believe we can all agree that this has been the most unique diplomatic meeting in recent history. Indeed, the German representative added, though perhaps we should classify it as an experimental exercise in international cooperation. Zelensky smiled, tucking his phone securely in his pocket. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we've demonstrated something important today. In times of crisis, whether it involves international relations or runaway robots, our ability to work together, and sometimes laugh together, is our greatest strength. As the diplomats filed out, already drafting very creative versions of their official reports, Zelensky turned to Patron, who was still proudly carrying his missile shell toy. You know, he said to the dog, scratching behind his ears, I think I have an idea for a new video series, Diplomatic Dog Days. What do you think? Patron barked enthusiastically, and somewhere in the palace, a maintenance robot began playing the Who Let the Dogs Out ringtone, just once for old time's sake. That evening, as Zelensky finally sat down in his office, he received a message from his son. Papa, your math homework video got more views than my gaming channel. Can you help me with trigonometry next? Looking at his phone's now famous meme collection, Zelensky couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best diplomatic victories came not from formal negotiations, but from embracing the unexpected chaos of life. Even if that chaos involved dancing robots, international meme incidents, and a very clever bomb-sniffing dog.
Tell us in the comments what part of this story impressed you the most. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next videos. See you in the world of incredible events.